Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a big fan of MAHA. When the whole MAHA thing happened, RFK Jr.'s campaign, everything he was talking about with environmental toxins, that's 10 out of 10, 100%, 11 out of 10. I was like, this is what I'm talking about. This is what we need. So you get a Donald Trump administration, you get RFK Jr., I'm a big fan. You get Tulsi Gabbard. Wow, Elon Musk, man. Talk about the whole package. So obviously, if you guys have followed the show, the Tim Has IRL, the things we've talked about with health, I'm always talking about some crazy thing or another, and I'm not even the craziest. You guys ever listen to that Luke Rudkowski guy over at We Are Change? He wears crystals, coffee enemas. I don't even know what's going on with all that. Look, I'm just trying to get better sleep, finding the right diet, exercising, and making sure I'm doing everything I can to be the best version of myself. That being said, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. They're killing chickens. Needless to say, I was mortified when I heard that the Biden administration was killing chickens, because you know how I feel about chickens. They're great. But there's fear of bird flu. We now have this big fear of measles. There's controversy around RFK Jr.'s statements on the MMR vaccine, which I think is largely fake. And questions about why Americans are so morbidly obese, what has caused this, and I certainly have a lot of ideas. So the first thing I'm going to say is, as always, I'm not a doctor, and I recommend you don't get medical advice from podcasts, especially from a guy like me who just reads stuff on the internet and complains about it. Find a doctor you trust, get second opinions if you think you need to, but always take your advice from trusted medical professionals. Literally, that's what I do. And we're gonna have some opinions, thoughts, stories, views from a cultural and political standpoint, and scientific and research and all that stuff. But your health is your health, man. So you got to make sure when you're addressing your health needs, someone tells you, because I can sit here and say things like, I've talked about, I cut the carbs down. I was doing keto for a while. Yeah, diabetics can't do that. So obviously, I'm not trying to talk to every individual specifically. What I am trying to say, me personally, is you guys should seek good advice on how you can improve your health. And we're going to talk about the bigger picture here, what RFK Jr. is bringing, what the administration is bringing. And there's a lot of stuff to talk about, particularly around RFK Jr.'s views on the MMR vaccine and now with the measles outbreak. There's a really funny video showing how the Brady Bunch handled measles versus how Law and Order handles measles. And then, of course, really big news is fascinating is West Virginia has banned artificial dyes. So that could have a major effect nationwide. We're going to go over all of this stuff to the best of our abilities. We got a great panel today. Why don't we start over here with you, good sir?
Hey, I'm Del Bigtree. I was Director of Communications for Robert Kennedy Jr. when he's running for president. I was with him when he was a Democrat. I was with him when he switched to being an independent, and I was there when he was making the decision whether or not to join President Trump, and we've all seen how that turned out. My background, I was a CBS producer on the daytime talk show The Doctors. I won an Emmy Award as a journalist, celebrating the best that science and medicine has to offer. I got into an investigation into vaccines and made a documentary about it called Vaxxed, which I think a lot of people credit with sort of igniting this medical freedom movement around the world. And I do a weekly talk show online like you, thehighwire.com. So
right on.
Yep.
Well, thanks for hanging out. We have this fine gentleman here, sir.
I'm Robert Malone. I'm actually am a physician
all right.
and a scientist. So I'm licensed in the state of Maryland. And let's see, how do I give a comparable backgrounder to Del here, who I consider a friend for many years now. I guess talking about Bobby, I got to know Bobby pretty well when he called me to ask some questions as he was building this book called The Real Anthony Fauci. And then he asked me to do extensive editing on it twice. I've also written a couple books, The Lies My Government Told Me and The Better Future Coming, and Psy-War, Enforcing the New World Order. The story that kind of catapulted me out into the public space was that for years I'd been working in biodefense and in academia. I actually am a vaccine developer and a vaccine innovator. I was the guy that originally came up with the idea of using RNA for vaccines. And I guess the shocker was that I also spoke out quite strongly about the bioethics of what was going down with the whole COVID crisis. And in particular started answering a lot of questions about the mRNA technology and raising my own concerns about that tech and what was being observed in the data concerning the safety and effectiveness of that. And that led to just a barrage of attacks from corporate media, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, Atlantic Monthly, etc., and led me down the path of trying to understand how modern media is working and these topics like psychological warfare and fifth-generation warfare. We write a podcast daily. A Substack daily. And sometimes I do 5 or 6 podcasts a day, but I don't have one of my own.
Well, right on. Thanks for hanging out. Should be interesting. We have one more gentleman here.
Yeah, tough person to follow there. But my name's Tristan Scott. I'm an electrical engineer by training and could say an expert or talk often online about the electromagnetic aspects of our biology and our environment, things like light, EMFs, and am now head of operations for a tech startup called Daylight Computer. And our whole mission is to build healthier, less stimulating, less addicting technology and get people back into the real world, which we like to say is outside. So it's, over the past 6-7 years kind of transformed my beliefs and understandings about what actually matters from a health perspective. And for me, it really comes back to trying to get back to a natural living in a modern world. So yeah, thanks for having me, Tim.
Speaking of light and stuff, I don't necessarily want to start right here, but there was one thing that really fascinated me that I had no idea, and I'm sure all of you did, is you mentioned light and how it affects people in the electromagnetic spectrum and things like that. Obviously, I knew about blue light, melatonin stimulation with, red light. I've got this headset that glows orange before bed. But recently I became a dad, and everybody won't stop hearing about it. That's what happens when people have kids. But they offered up blue light therapy as a precaution for jaundice, babies who are bilirubin building up in the blood. That didn't happen to my child, but they said, it was we can wait and see if the baby becomes jaundice. It's not, the baby's fine. And then we were like, why don't we just do blue light? Is it bad? And I was surprised to see, because it never occurred to me, literally they put a baby under a blue light. That's it. And they put a little blindfold on the baby. And the blue light has an effect on the bilirubin in the blood, which makes it transforms it into a different particle or whatever, I don't know, protein or something, making it easier to remove. And that kind of blew my mind because I never actually thought about light actually affects the things in your blood. And at hospitals, they literally have blue lights to change things in your blood. So people really don't consider how your screens, your TVs, how it's affecting your brain, your blood, your body. And so when we're setting up the show, it's like, what should we talk about? There's all these things. There's the bird flu, the culling of the chickens, and there's this war on the health of human beings, essentially. That I'm not saying literally there's evil people twirling their mustaches and being like, how can we, harm as many people as possible? But we've built this world with artificial dyes, preservatives that are toxic and poisonous, and TV screens that blast us with these lights, and we don't realize, and not to mention non-ionizing radiation, and often inadvertently ionizing radiation. And we are living in this world where we're looking at chronic disease, questions around why it's happening, and then we have a population that's not getting enough sleep. They're getting blasted with blue light before sleep. They're eating, their diets are all out of whack. Like, they're eating way too many sugars, way too few proteins, getting no vitamins. So I guess we can just start here somewhere at the beginning. What is, in your guys' opinion, the largest contributor to the chronic health epidemic in the United States?
Free market commerce.
I don't disagree.
I mean, that really is the issue, right? And it's interesting because, I've been a journalist most of my life and looking at medicine and science, but working with Bobby for the first time, I've always had an opinion about politics and decisions that politicians are making. But when you start, really running a candidate, and then as he got closer and closer and finally made this decision to be HHS secretary, you know, things like I want a free market, right? I scream for free market. But then when you look at like red dye number 3, which was removed, I think 2 days before Biden left office, and Califf, who was the FDA head, they were asking him, you know, what took so long? You knew for 10 years this, you know, can cause cancer. It's an endocrine disruptor. We took it out of cosmetics, but left it in food. And he said, you know, and it was like sort of the discussion we've all been hearing about Fruit Loops. The colors in Fruit Loops are, there's chemicals that are poisonous. It's illegal in Europe. They have a totally different Fruit Loops box than we have. Why is that here? And he said, because we took the colors out and the product, or, you know, Kellogg said the product didn't sell as well. So the bright colors made it sell better. And who are we to get involved with the commerce of a company? It is where you do see this real conflict that we don't think about, right? The beauty of this country is we have this open free market system, and we want, you know, to have capitalism and everything thrive, but you don't think about, is there a place for regulation, right? And I think that that's really going to be the question right now over the next couple of years.
I say yes. Regulate away. There are a lot of libertarians, anarchists, and I don't mean the far left weirdos. I mean, you know, Michael Malice's position is the government shouldn't be regulating these things. It should be more of a free market. I completely disagree. I think if anything a government should do is be like, hey, you know, that food you're eating is not food, and that company's telling you it is. So we're going to just say, hey, don't do that. I know it's not easy, and the fear is often you give the authority to the government, they'll abuse it. But what's the alternative? All of our food, almost all of it, I mean, even emulsifiers, right? Like Gelen gum and locust bean gum and these things. There are reports coming out saying that this is causing high rates of colon cancer because it's building up in the body. It's not being absorbed or digested, and it simulates creaminess. So, for instance, I used to drink this coconut milk, really good. I'm not gonna attack the company, but I decided to stop drinking it because it's got emulsifiers in it for no reason, none whatsoever. I don't need my coconut milk to be fake milk. Just give me the coconut juice, it's fine. But they put this stuff in it. Now, you go to the grocery store, a lot of the heavy cream you buy also has Gelen gum in it, an emulsifier to make it seem fattier. Just give me regular food. I don't understand why they're putting all this stuff in here. And it sells better when it hits certain, palate expectations. So now, most of our food is poisoned, and not even that. Good luck finding food not sealed in plastic. So it's going to have PCBs and other stuff leached into it.
So, Tim, to kind of support where you're coming from, I think, and I think personally, I think this is a real challenge for MAHA. I think it's one of the most fundamental issues that MAHA is going to have to grapple with as it moves from populism to policy to kind of long-term sustainable implementation, is how do we avoid the nanny state? How do we avoid a situation in which the government has an overbearing hand on everything in our lives, which once the bureaucrats get a hold of things that have seemed like a good idea, it often seems to go down that road. So here's an example. Glyphosate, Roundup. I mean, you're living out here in rural West Virginia, and everybody's using Roundup all the time. What has happened over the last decade is the use of glyphosate as a desiccant. Now, what does that mean? When you're growing crops, corn, wheat, soybeans, you have to have a big harvester come through to harvest that. Those things are super expensive. Most farmers these days don't own one. They basically contract with a company that comes through and does it. Well, what does that mean in a practical sense? It means that you have to be able to say that on Wednesday the 23rd, we're going to be ready for you to bring in your machine. And it's going to cost a lot of money to do that. So how do you do that? Because you can't naturally control when your crop is going to be ready, when the grain is going to be dry. So what do? As the grain is now matured, you go and spray the whole field with Roundup, okay? And then it dies, and the harvester comes in and harvests all that. As a consequence, almost all of our wheat, soy, oats, Quaker oats, is contaminated with glyphosate, with Roundup. So who cares? Well, Bobby cares. This is one of the things that really made his career was the lawsuit against Monsanto having to do with Roundup. And by the way, this was not what was done a decade ago. So now you've got a situation in which your children and you are eating glyphosate without even knowing it.
So,
and does it matter? Why does it matter? Well, there's plenty of studies out now that show that Roundup ingestion in animal models in fetal development has two main impacts: autism and obesity. Ever heard those two before? The point is, this is something that's banned in Europe, just like the dyes. And I think this is a proper, as we talk about the kind of the fine line, where does the government step in and where do they stay behind? I think that they have got to get toxins out of our food supply. I think it's a lot more than just educating people. I think that is something where it's clear cut.
real quick, you said glyphosate was banned in Europe?
Glyphosate in food is not allowed.
Oh, okay. They do still use it. They have EU has it, EU website. It's approved as an active substance until 2033 with certain conditions and restrictions. How do they prevent it from getting in the food, though, if they're putting it on crops? I mean, obviously, in the United States, do they test the food to make sure it didn't contaminate it or something?
I don't know the nuances of what's going on in Europe in terms of how they're maintaining their integrity of their food supply. But I know in the United States there is testing done, and it's demonstrating that we have high levels of glyphosate in virtually all of our soybean and grain crops.
This is interesting. The website also, aside from saying they did approve it, mentions that the European Commission officially received the submissions of the fourth successful European Citizens Initiative by supporting the Stop Glyphosate European Citizens Initiative. Over 1 million citizens from at least 7 member states have called on the EU to propose member states ban a ban on glyphosate, to reform the pesticide approval procedure, and set EU-wide mandatory reduction targets for pesticide use. I guess my question then is, it's interesting. When I pull up the wiki, not like Wikipedia is the greatest source or anything like that, it just says it kills weeds. At some point, they decided instead of killing weeds that they were going to use it as a desiccant to prepare crops. Is that what happened?
Absolutely.
It seems strange. This is what I've heard from a lot of people, that basically it dries out the plants. So
it kills them.
Right.
It kills them. No, by the way, the ones that are not genetically modified. The entire purpose of genetically modified food was to design vegetables that don't die when you spray this deadly poison on it, and everything else around it dies. So you're getting glyphosate on the GMO crops. The entire purpose of a GMO crop is one that is glyphosate resistant, and then you take the ones that aren't GMO crops and you kill them, which is why when you see a loaf of bread and it says non-GMO, that's not a good thing. People go, oh, it's like organic. No, it's nothing like organic. What it's saying is this was just regular wheat we poured glyphosate all over it before we ground it up and stuck it in this loaf of bread. So people need to recognize that non-GMO, sure, the crop wasn't designed to be Roundup resistant. They didn't want it to be because they used it the last minute to dry the entire crop out. So you're getting it no matter what you do. But I think to the point also, the farmers are terrified of Robert Kennedy Jr., people wanting to look at glyphosate. It's going to infect their entire industry. This is what they've gotten used to as modern farming. And now we've got to figure out, how do we move them back into regenerative farming, organic farming? Do they want to retrain? I mean, all of those things. This is what they know as farming. They have, GMO seeds that are, ready for the glyphosate to be poured all over them. Or, I mean, the entire, Monsanto has made the entire farming system based around their product. And they've got all farmers, I would say, hooked on it. It's not their fault. It's just what modern farming was going to be, until now we're waking up and say, wait a minute, it's killing us. Even the vegetables are bad for us.
Well, so real quick, I guess I would call it the mainstream statement or view on glyphosate is that it is a misinformation campaign, that glyphosate causes autism or cancers. There's an article from Science-Based Medicine saying that Stephanie Seneff, a computer scientist at MIT, who thinks that gives her sufficient expertise in epidemiology to do studies in it, among her wider claims that glyphosate, GMOs, and other modern lifestyle factors are responsible for the recent increase in concussions. She's long been claiming glyphosate causes autism. Perhaps my favorite claim of hers is that by 2025, half of all children will be autistic. Truly, Seneff is a master of inappropriately confusing correlation with causation. This is an op-ed. I find it interesting, but it is this is really strange. It's an opinion piece by David Gorski, but it is cited as a factual article by Wikipedia in the misinformation campaigns. It says, glyphosate has become a focus of campaigning and misinformation by anti-GMO activists because of its association with genetically modified glyphosate-resistant crops. U.S. politician R.F. Kennedy Jr. has incorporated glyphosate into his anti-vaccination rhetoric, falsely claiming that both glyphosate and vaccines may be contributing to the American obesity epidemic. I think I was going to say Stephanie Seneff also falsely claimed that it may have a role in autism. I'd like to find a better source than a couple of op-eds, but that's the only thing Wikipedia has cited.
So this is why we write our Substack. So when we did our essay on glyphosate, we went to the primary literature. And we cited that primary literature and summarized it for people. So if you go into our Substack, you'll find the actual journal articles, and you can bypass all of this op-ed opinion from Wiki and the utilization of these terms like misinformation, which is just more part of the propaganda. Go to the basic science. Go to the peer-reviewed literature on the use of glyphosate and the testing that is being done on various animal models, because you're not going to feed glyphosate to children. Or to pregnant women intentionally. You do that with laboratory models. But then what's also been done is a series of studies looking at, for instance, pregnancy and urine, maternal urine, and glyphosate contamination. And the glyphosate contamination being found in the urine of pregnant women is aligned with the levels that are known to be causing these effects in animal models. So that's how you do toxicology. So all of that, we've seen this again and again and again. You have this narrative that's built up and supported, and it persists long after the actual data are out there. And it's very difficult to break because they use these mechanisms to reinforce it. But you got to go back to the emerging science. And what happens is when you have a time when this science is not a thing, right? That's scientism. When you have change going on in the research data, often corporate media is way behind the curve, typically years. So that's why we do what we do with our Substack.
That makes a lot of sense as to why the corporate press is behind the curve, because they're well behind the research. It would be silly to think that some journalist in an office who's never been in a lab has the bleeding edge understanding of all this technology. What I will say is, are you familiar with BMJ.com?
Yeah, British Medical Journal.
Yeah.
And is this a prominent medical journal for publishing?
BMJ is a really quite a good journal.
Yeah.
They're not flawless like any medical journal.
But I just want to make sure I'm not pulling up some
they're
by night random conspiracy blog.
They are one of the few that has come through the COVID crisis with integrity.
So I wanted to I want to make sure that people who are listening understand BMJ is not some random conspiracy site, because they actually do have a peer-reviewed publication, Prenatal and Infant Exposure to Ambient Pesticides and Autism Spectrum Disorder in Children, population-based case control study, with the conclusion, findings suggest that an offspring's risk of autism spectrum disorder increases following prenatal exposure to ambient pesticides within 2,000 meters, I'm assuming, of the mother's residence during pregnancy, compared with offspring of women from the same agricultural region without such exposure. Infant exposure could further increase risk for autism spectrum disorder with comorbid intellectual disability. They do include a correction citing that there was an oversight and a potential conflict of interest. I want to make sure everybody understands that. But this is what BMJ has as a published, peer-reviewed journal on the issue. And so I just find interesting, when you pull up glyphosate on Wikipedia, you want to talk about how the media operates, happens to be one of my biggest critiques of my biggest focuses, one of my focuses, misinformation campaigns in the glyphosate Wikipedia, where it cites an opinion piece. I was surprised to see that it linked to science-based medicine, and it was an opinion piece. I figured I'd click on it and it would give me a peer-reviewed journal, claiming that it's misinformation to make that connection. Meanwhile, an actual peer-reviewed journal on BMJ.com states that they did find that there was an increased risk with autism spectrum disorder based on ambient pesticides. Why is Wikipedia allowing its editors to place an opinion, an op-ed, not a scientific journal, as a citation to call it misinformation? Meanwhile, BMJ actually has a study which says, you actually found this. Now, I have no problem saying if it's contentious and there's conflicting scientific studies, then it requires more data. I have no problem saying that. I have no problem saying some have found that it may actually do this. Others have contested it. I think that's a fair thing to do. Why would Wikipedia put an op-ed as a scientific citation. Well, that seems absurd.
So, Tim, one of the things about Wikipedia, I've had to dig into this because, of course, I'm slandered and defamed on Wikipedia in every which way, and they still claim that. Yes, I'm
And mine's
sure.
locked. No one can change it. Like they locked in all the negative stuff on me, and you can't do anything about it.
Wikipedia has some quirks, just like a lot of the AIs do. A lot of the AIs and Wikipedia don't actually cite peer-reviewed literature. They have a list of sources that you're allowed to use in building your edits to the Wikipedia page, and most of those are aligned with the Trusted News Initiative. They're basically the big news outlets, and so they don't go into peer-reviewed literature. That's actually disallowed both by many of the AIs for training purposes as well as for Wikipedia. And so you find the situation like, just not to make it about myself, but I had all of these attacks that are recited again and again and again on Wikipedia, but no references to my actual 100-plus peer-reviewed papers. That's not allowed. It's a very strange ecosystem, information ecosystem associated with Wikipedia that's really biased towards supporting and enforcing corporate media.
I'd like to just pull up one other, because I actually have many different studies. This is, I hope everybody's, look, let me just give you the quick overview one more time before I show all of these different studies, which maybe they're wrong. I have no idea. I'm not a scientist, right? At the very least, if there is a debate over the issue, and there are claims by people in science-based mag or whatever that website is, claiming it's misinformation, it should be, here is a scientific study that found no correlation or inconclusive data, and here's a study that challenges, here's a study that supports. The issue is widely debated, with some saying yes, some saying no. I'm fine with that, if that was the case. But when they lead with, it's misinformation because this guy called the woman stupid and said so, and then I just Googled it, and I have a list of various peer-reviewed studies showing a link between either glyphosate, autism spectrum disorders, autism-related disorders, or pesticide in general. This one from, and I think this is the stupidest name for a journal, but they went with it, PNAS. So
it's the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Well, I want to just jump in because you're pointing out the exact problem in the world we live in.
Real
right?
quick, just so I can show this real quick. This is maternal glyphosate exposure causes autism-like behaviors in offspring through increased expression of soluble epoxide hydrolase, and this is PNAS. They're going to mention that there's a correction for this article that I should check out, and there's always something in it where they say correction, yada, 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 by these individuals. First published, author's note, the author's name should appear as Debin, Debin Wan, not Wang. They apologize for the error. But when they put out this thing and saying there's a correction on it, that's often used to say, hey, this is not legit. Yeah. There's a SCRP. You're familiar with SCRP? Is that another?
I don't know what the acronym is. I don't know.
Scientific Research Academic, SCIRP.
So that is not if you want to dig into this, this is actually Journal of Behavioral and Brain Science.
Ah, I see. Okay. It's listed up there. This is an aggregator.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to look, you should just look at the research that got presented in the courts, because Bayer Monsanto had to settle billions in lawsuits, right, for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that's what
NHL. Yes.
Yeah.
So this is the links to obesity and autism is new science that's coming.
Yeah, and it's because there's too many confounding variables. It's hard to prove in a court of law. That's what Bobby was arguing.
I will just say settlement does not mean fact.
No.
A company that settles usually settles because litigation is more expensive, and that's probably the majority of lawsuits.
But typically, in order to have a precedent, there's like there's a lot of science in order to even have that precedent. That's what kind of Bob.
I disagree with the lawsuit thing. I don't think it's a good example.
Yeah, but I think you have to get to this point. Is what we're all trying to say is there a signal or is there not a signal? Does this deserve more research? And we're living in a time where they keep telling us the science is settled. There are laws right now that they're trying to pass all across this country to give the same liability protection to glyphosate that's sprayed on all of our crops, so you will never be able to sue. You'll never be able to go into courtroom again, just like we have with vaccines. So why would you need liability protection if the product is perfectly safe? We know we have issues. These are real signals. And to your point, Wikipedia, our media, mainstream, is absolutely screaming misinformation. They did it all throughout COVID. We have a congressional investigation, a 500-page document that comes out and says social distancing, 6 feet was made up, had no science behind it, even though Tony Fauci stood in front of cameras and said to us, if you question me, you're questioning the science. Now he admits in front of the Congress there was no science in the 6-foot distance rule. There is no science that masks actually stop transmission. All of these, the vaccine couldn't stop transmission, even though it said it was 95% effective, yet still, every one of those news organizations talk about those of us that called that out from the very beginning, that we're still the ones spreading misinformation when our government clearly caught, Rand Paul has pointed this out, clearly was the one distributing misinformation. They continue, Wikipedia is a misinformation vessel, and most of mainstream is. But can we just talk really quickly, because the science around this glyphosate in the gut and autism, first of all, I'd be the first to say we don't have enough science on any of this. It is so hard to get decent investigations because you're being blocked by the industry itself, which has been controlling your regulatory agencies, which is the light at the end of the tunnel with Robert Kennedy Jr. You finally have someone that doesn't work for any of these industries going in and saying, we're going to do real peer-reviewed science and put it all on the table. But what's very fascinating about glyphosate, whether it does or does not, autism, the heart of this, the whole MMR conversation with Andrew Wakefield, who's the big baddie, the first doctor to ever connect MMR and the potential of autism. But it was an intestinal study. The guy he was a gastroenterologist back in the late 1990s, who all these parents said, my child has what looks like Crohn's disease, but they got it right after they had autism, and I'm wondering if there's a connection. That's what his study started with. It got sidetracked into being about a vaccine, but the question was this a neurological disorder or was it a gut disorder? And what he started looking into is it appears to be directly connected with the gut. Now they're doing studies where they do fecal transplant. They take a healthy child's feces and put it in the intestine of an autistic child, and that child does better. They've been doing it in rats. It's amazing. And they can do the opposite. They can take autistic rats, take their feces, and put it into a healthy rat and make it start having autism qualities. So we're in a whole new space now where your gut health appears to be affecting our neurological health, right?
Do you watch South Park?
Very rarely.
Very rarely, but they did that episode where everyone was trying to steal Tom Brady's feces because the health effects of the transplant.
Yeah.
You mentioned early on the free market was likely the problem. With everything we're talking about in media, there was that viral video of this news program is brought to you by Pfizer, over and over again. And I don't know that it's necessarily a free market when you have monopolistic forces. And I turn on Fox News every day, and I got to tell you, my absolute favorite commercial is, have you seen the Fanapt Iperidone or whatever it's called? It's like this anime woman opening her shop and smiling, and she sees an elderly couple laughing. The whole time it's telling you about this medication that can kill you, cause stroke, prolongs the QT interval, which is associated with heart arrhythmia or sudden death, and how it's like, it lists all these insane side effects where it's like, that sounds scarier than whatever it is the person's, it's bipolar 1 disorder or whatever. But we have these commercials, to me, they're absolutely insane, and they're funding all of our news programs, even Fox News.
That's right. That's right. So everything you're watching, your news reporters, their boss, because I worked for CBS, I worked on the daytime talks with the doctors. My boss ultimately is mostly the pharmaceutical industry. If you want to run a story that goes against a product of theirs, you will not work very long for that network. And that's just the way it goes.
But Del, can you kind of dig in a little bit? So the dynamic here is more complex than just that. My understanding is that pharma is basically shoveling money at media as a way to co-opt media. It's not just to advertise these things to the consumer. All that money co-opts media kind of prospectively, so that media has this bias that we won't run stories that are contrary to the interests of our big sponsors because we don't want to lose that nipple.
Well, it's another kind of marketing that people need to be aware of. There's the overt, Coca-Cola buys a billboard saying buy our product, and then there's the social repercussion of the advertising, which I talk about why we advertise. And a few years ago, we bought a bunch of ads in Times Square. We bought the whole North Tower on New Year's Eve was Timcast. And that's not, the intention is not so that people see it and then come watch the show. It's a cultural impact ad. We want people to think certain things about what our company does, what it represents, not necessarily to know it exists, but we want industry leaders to think certain things. So when we see the buys of these advertisements, to your point, Dr. Malone, they're not necessarily trying to make people call their doctor and say, I want to buy this. They're trying to say, we own you, to the journalists, to the editors, and create this effective barrier. While some marketing will sell a product for you, hey, everybody buy my soda, other marketing protects you from negative marketing.
It's the power of the withdrawal of the ad. Their power is in, we will pull our ads from you and stop paying you if you keep doing stories like that. That is what they're buying, right? Just like Tony Fauci, who distributed billions of dollars around the world to universities on a yearly basis, to do studies. The power is in withdrawing that funding from a university. So anytime a university wants to do a study on glyphosate or wants to do a study on anything,
ring.
Hey, I see here we gave you $10 million last year. We were planning on doing that this year, but we don't like this professor you have working,
nice research program you have there. It would be a shame if something happened to it.
That's right.
And that's where it comes back to what was your original question is like, why are we in this state? It's misaligned incentives. And I would disagree. I don't think it's a free market because it's not free. There's so much government intervention. There's so much big corporation manipulation. I mean, the food system, the ag, for example, how many billions in subsidies have we paid?
That is the libertarian point of view.
And then
we really don't have a free market.
No, and I'm joking. When
I know.
But you're right.
The tricky thing is, what's the appropriate response then? What's the appropriate response to like fighting against something that the deck's been stacked in the opposite direction so much?
Look at what we just saw with the EPA. Lee Zell, did you guys hear this story? They found a $375 billion slush fund that was giving climate change grants. One nonprofit was formed a month before receiving $7 billion. Wow. There apparently were two funds, and I'm not accusing anybody of any wrongdoing, but the New York Post referenced Climate Justice Fund and Justice Climate Fund, both one receiving $1 billion, one receiving $7 billion, I think were the numbers. It's not a free market.
No.
There's one story where a guy worked for a nonprofit, and then he got hired by the Biden administration, immediately then started awarding grants back to the nonprofit. We see people who work for big pharmaceutical companies and big agricultural companies taking jobs at the FDA. It's not free market when the government is giving out billions and billions in direct cash subsidies and grants to make something happen. It looks like the free market because those somethings then buy advertisements on TV.
I will say this. When I had read Ayn Rand, early on when I was in my 20s, and Atlas Shrugged, and of course like sort of the godmother, I guess, of libertarian thought, or certainly deep in it. And it pissed me off because I was a liberal. Like by the end of the book, I was like, wait a minute, this is pissing me. I thought I was with it. Now you're pissing me off. And it used to always bother me because I thought, in the idea sort of like survival of the fittest, but she didn't sort of deal with monopolies. I felt like ultimately survival of the fittest. If you get enough money in your family and you're passing on your money, eventually, can the Koch brothers, are their children going to be the smartest people running our country? They have an advantage because they're financially strong. And then when I started getting into the issues and investigations that got me into all the trouble that I'm in now, I went back because I was like, maybe I'm missing something. And I remember I typed in Ayn Rand monopolies. And it popped up as an old Donahue. I don't know, it's way before your guys' time, but this talk show called Donahue, and she was on. He asked my exact question. He's like, but Ayn, it's a very interesting, idea that survival of the fittest, but what about monopolies? Certainly a company, the train company in the center of, Atlas Shrugged, this family makes enough money. They don't have to be the smartest any longer. They have power. And she said, if you show me a monopoly that did not get government funding,
precisely,
then I will. If you show me one, I will never speak again. She said, I want to be perfectly clear. I'm against welfare for the poor, and I'm against welfare for the rich. And what we have is a welfare for the rich. Our government gets involved. It chooses the better products, and it changes the entire natural course of all business. And I think that's what we have to look at. It's what we're talking about.
This is the Murray Rothbard position, who is really more of the intellectual guns behind modern. The term is anarcho-capitalism. He coined it. That's the Austrian School of Economics that Javier Milei comes from. And this is precisely his point, is that monopolies only exist when government creates them.
Right. Right. Solar is a great idea. Does it make sense to pour, billions of dollars of then we throw it out, or electric cars. All at a certain point, a market takes over. I mean, it's a good question. How does it compete? But you look at like when Bobby Kennedy or anyone you want to get in, you can't. If you just said let's just take away all subsidies, like our nation is like it's all built on band-aids on band-aids. If you tear them off, which is what Trump's doing right now, it's gonna hurt. You know.
I agree largely with the talk about government funding and manipulation and how it controls markets. But there still is a question around artificial dyes, for instance, in foods. Because like you were saying earlier, the brighter colors sell better. And you can go back to the stories of the old snake oil salesman. 10 years ago, I was at a mall. You ever see a balance bracelet? You guys know what balance bracelets are? Yeah. It's a lie, is what it is. And what these companies were doing were selling rubber bands, silicone bracelets, and then using a magic trick known to every magician, known as the center of gravity illusion, where you ask a person to. So they do this trick to. It's largely pattern distraction to claim that an object is imbued with magic powers, which they're then going to make disappear or levitate or who knows what. You tell someone it's got magic powers, put it in your hand. And then, or actually you say, put your arms out, stand on one leg. They will put their hand on your arm and pull slightly at a downward, rightward angle away from your center of gravity, causing you to fall over. They will then hand you the magical object imbued with great chi, and you'll hold it in your hand. They then push down slightly towards the center of gravity. To the average person, they don't recognize the slight shift, but when you're pushing towards the center of gravity, the person cannot fall. So they're being pushed down, and they're like, why aren't I falling over? A company figured out this thing and started selling rubber bands, telling everybody the rubber band will improve your performance. They were in malls all across the country. They made, I think, tens of millions of dollars before the FTC stepped in and said, stop tricking people and stealing their money, selling them $50 rubber bands. There is the question of the nanny state. We don't want to be like Mike Bloomberg, who went on TV and said, tax the poor, don't let them buy large sodas because they're stupid and they hurt themselves. But there is a line, right, where we're like, bro, you can't sell rubber bands for $50 and use a magic trick.
I agree. And the example I like to use is, there's a strong case to be made that modern McDonald's diet causes obesity, and obesity is one of the major drivers of diabetes and a variety of health problems. But do we want to have the state saying that you can't eat McDonald's hamburgers and drink sugary Coca-Colas? We don't. I think most of us would agree that's not okay. But then the converse is, if those McDonald's products are using, let's say, seed oils in their manufacturing that is associated with health risks that are, above and beyond the call, and they don't have to do those things, does the state have the right to say, no, we're not going to allow you to use seed oils? Now, I'm not advocating that position right now, but I'm making the point.
Can I ask about seed oils, though? Do you have a position on seed oils?
Absolutely. Seed oils, I'm convinced, are a major driver in our obesity crisis.
What is the mechanism for that?
It has to do with their metabolism or absence of metabolism and the storage of the fatty product, to the best of my knowledge. I'm not an expert on it.
So are you guys familiar at all with the seed oil thing?
Just lightly. I'm not a scientist on it either. I'm cutting seed oils out just because...
Why not?
Why not? Like, while we're at it, I'm going to assume it's correct.
It's toxic. If you look into how they're produced, it's, there's so many chemical derivatives just to get a seed to the seed oil end product. They're extracting it with chemicals like hexane, and then they're putting deodorizers in on it. And then it's a polyunsaturated fat, so it oxidizes greater naturally, and then it sits on the shelf in a clear plastic bottle, and the only reason it's not, obviously rancid is because they put all these deodorizers and coloring in it. So it's really a toxic end-to-end product. You could make a more natural seed oil if it was like cold press and all that, and debate what, health ramifications that has. But typically from just end to end, like a canola oil is just extremely toxic.
Is that the canola is the seed?
Yes, it comes from the rapeseed plant.
Interesting.
Those are those fields you see with the yellow bloom.
And then they're also, of course, a monocrop, getting back to, being sprayed with glyphosate and Roundup.
I read it. We planted sunflowers a couple years ago, and they're amazing. And it's crazy when you take the head, you bash it, and the seeds go flying out. And I was reading how indigenous natives, they would take all the seeds and they'd press it using like wood planks or something, and they get the oil out of it. And so I thought it was kind of strange when people said seed oils are bad. And I'm like, but people have been eating sunflower seed oils. So is it really the seed themselves, or as you're saying, is it the process and the toxification after the fact?
It's both, because then imagine what quantity are you actually going to be able to do that at if you did it like manually. Like it's not a very scalable process to like naturally extract and cold press. So the fact that we're consuming this quantity of seed oils and then the oxidized linoleic acid and everything is the real problem. It's comprising such a large portion of calories that our biology is not meant for that, and it's really a mitochondrial toxin at the end of the day.
So I've heard avocado oil, olive oil are really good. Are y'all familiar with Brian Johnson, the guy who wants to live forever?
Yes.
He said a teaspoon of olive oil with every meal is one of the most powerful anti-aging things you can do. Is there any concern about animal proteins? He's a vegan, that's why I bring it up.
I would prefer to always cook with like a saturated fat, because it's going to be the least prone to oxidation when you're cooking at high heat. So I personally cook with butter or beef tallow. But then if you have a good extra virgin olive oil, drizzle that on top or use it as finishing, or if you're cooking at low temperatures, I think that's great. But the problem with olive oil and avocado oil is like 80 to 90% of them on the shelves in the store are actually cut with seed oils. And this goes back to this whole like marketing and labeling problem that we have in our food system as well.
Have you, let me ask you guys a question. If you went to a restaurant and they had a meat, it said meat steak entree with an asterisk next to it, would you would you eat something described as generic meat product, or like would you have questions about it?
I don't really know what you mean. Is there such
Like
a thing? Like it's not meat, or is it a process?
No, like you go to a restaurant and you're like, "Do you have steak? We have meat steak." Would you ask?
That would freak me out.
For sure.
What's meat
For sure.
What's meat steak, and why are you calling it that?
Right,
Can't you tell me if it's beef or bison?
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I bison steak is, and I bring this up because my buddy Luke, I bring him up because he's a crazy health nut, right? He has a card, and it says, "Here are all the things I cannot eat," and he hands it to the waiter, and then basically forces them to disinfect and sterilize the kitchen. Yeah. But he asked the question, what do you fry your foods in? And they say, I'll check. And do you know what they always say? Vegetable oil.
Yeah.
Right.
And to which my response was, which one?
Right.
They don't know.
Yeah.
And so I have concerns about what that literally means, because, I mean, there's some vegetables, like we've got poisonous vegetables outside. I assume the majority of vegetables you can't actually eat.
Well, I mean, and I think that the seed oils is being called a vegetable oil. So I mean,
it's the same stuff.
It's all
that is pure labeling for vegetable as a positive connotation. That's why they changed the name from like rapeseed oil to canola oil too. It's like, who's gonna buy rapeseed oil?
But this gets into a fundamental thing. What is the role of the USDA?
Yeah.
And the structure is that actually FDA has oversight in terms of food safety over USDA. So what is the role for USDA and FDA under MAHA to ensure that we have transparency in labeling? I think that's one of the key issues of MAHA, is that consumers have the right to know. And there's a lot of this, it is misinformation. They are basically inventing words or substituting language that's being allowed by our regulatory authorities in order to avoid true transparency to the consumer, so that they have informed the information they need to make an informed choice. And that, I think, as we talk about these fine issues about nanny state, et cetera, I think one thing that we should all be able to agree on is that we have truth in labeling. And there's so many ways that that's twisted. For instance, one of the ones that I love, you seem to be pretty aware of the agriculture industry and beef and chicken, et cetera. So did you know that increasingly our meat is coming from the rainforest? It's coming from Brazil, the biggest meat packer in the world that's kind of sweeping over and controlling all of our meat processing is Brazilian. And the rule is that they can import animal products, we could call it food, into the United States from offshore whatever source. And by the way, those sources have different rules in terms of pesticides, vaccines, all kinds of things. They can import it into the United States, and all they have to do is basically put a knife on that meat, and then it can be labeled as made in the United States. And you have no visibility in terms of what the chain is that brought that food to your table. The only thing that you can do in the face of all this is try to seek out local farmers and buy, here in Virginia, we love to buy local Virginia grass-fed beef, and where you're buying it from the farmer, and typically it's a smaller farmer. This is kind of the whole Joel Salatin issue. Is getting away from these huge factory farms that's producing major amounts of pork, chicken, and imported beef, and back to more of a local, bottom-up, decentralized food supply for our meats, because basically the industry has figured out all these different ways to kind of cook the books.
I think you have to get back. I think what Bob is going to have to do is get back to actually, as taxpayers, we're going to have to decide that we want to fund unbiased studies being done by our own science body that's hopefully selected by people like Robert Kennedy Jr. What I didn't realize before I started investigating, the pharmaceutical industry, is that the industries are doing all the safety trials. They're doing their own studies. They're cherry picking their own study. So they're not even, one of the things Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to do right away is he's saying, when he says radical transparency, he's going to make every industry show every study they did, not just the ones that gave them the result they wanted, so that we can say, wait a minute, because all we're seeing when you're at the FDA, if you're going to a VRBAC committee, which is the committee that decides whether a drug gets onto the market, or you go to the CDC's ACIP committees, all you're seeing from the industry is the study that proved what they wanted to prove. This product actually pulled this off. You don't see the 5 that failed, the 5 trials that failed. If we saw all of the trials that were going on, I think we might have a different perspective.
Just to clarify,
you're
saying a company will do a study, fail, do another study, fail,
hide it,
do another study, fail, do another study, and say, we got it.
It's worse than that. It's worse than that, Tim. Yeah. So, as somebody who's an expert in regulatory affairs, what the general rules are in pharma is you don't ever do any study that the FDA doesn't require you to do, because you might get a bad outcome and screw up your product, okay? So that's one of the reasons why they don't investigate these things that we're all perplexed about. How come you didn't look into this? Yeah. Now, another thing that what Dell's pointing to, this kind of suppression of information or failure to reveal key information, that is technically not allowed in terms of the FDA, and that's a case of not enforcing the regs that are on the books. So the rules are that if you're Corporation X and you're developing product Y, and some academic somewhere does a study that relates to product Y, you're supposed to put that in your regulatory package and disclose it to the FDA. You talk about radical transparency. Yep. The rules are that there's supposed to be radical transparency, and they're not being enforced. And that is, I think, one of the big things, and that's where you get to the corruption of the FDA because of these revolving door relationships, et cetera, is we've created a kind of a government culture where it's okay to only enforce the rules that you want to enforce, and only enforce them for those companies that you aren't with you. So for big pharma, they get to slide on all kinds of stuff, whereas small biotech innovators have the rule book thrown at them. And that whole dynamic has got to change. It gets back to, government creating monopolies, and one of the ways they do it is they give special allowance to the big boys that allows them to engage in these practices.
Or on top of that, the big boys have the legal means to challenge government resources in court and win, whereas smaller producers don't have that same ability.
True.
Even more, the most surprising thing to me in working with Bobby and starting to really, I was looking at the list of jobs he had to fill. He's going to have 80,000 employees underneath him. He got to add 300 of his own, and just looking at how this whole thing works. But what I didn't realize is that, the big industries will act like, oh my God, all the regulations have got our hands tied. It's terrible dealing with the FDA. They're the ones that set the regulations.
Yes, absolutely.
They're the ones that demanded it. They
precisely.
prefer it.
This is another key thing, is that regulations are the friend of the big boys, the big players, because they're the only ones that have the capital and the infrastructure in order to meet those regulatory requirements. And so the regulations serve to exclude the smaller or to mid-size innovator, which is what the big boys, whether it's big ag or big pharma or, fill in the blank, they like to have that complex regulatory environment because it gives them a competitive advantage, because their small innovator competitors can't comply with the federal requirements.
Let me ask you guys: would you eat cloned meat?
No.
Probably are. This is how crazy things have gotten in this country. The story's from 10 years ago, just about 10 years ago. Alex Jones came on Timcast IRL, and it's fascinating to listen to this guy because he says things, and you're sitting there thinking, this guy's out of his mind. He's sitting here being like, we're having a conversation, and he abruptly goes, well, now you got all these people eating cloned beef. They're eating animals. They're cloning animals. We're eating them. And I'm like, Alex, stop. No, we're not. And he goes, wait, what? Google it. And I Googled it, and from phys.org, are you eating cloned meat? The answer is probably. The FDA cleared in 2008 cloned beef to be consumed. We don't track for it. And so there are a lot of producers that find desirable traits within cows. Look at the popularity of Wagyu. What do you want to go through the arduous process of certified Wagyu A7 Japanese? Sure, if you're in Japan. But what if you're doing Brazilian Wagyu or whatever? You take a sample of the animal and you clone it a bunch of times, and now you've got meat to sell. So this actually is, we don't know for sure how much cloned meat we're actually eating. You probably are eating it without realizing it. The things that have happened in, I can't remember what documentary it was, where it showed how they made common beef for fast food, and they take like 20% of the beef that's pulverized into a pulp, mix it with cleaners and like ammonia to sterilize it, and then mix it back in as a filler to the existing beef.
I think this was the supersize.
Was that supersize meat?
Yeah.
There's things like that we don't realize in our food, and they can claim all of it is still beef.
Yeah. So that's another problem is, again, it gets back to truth in labeling. And that's the combination of USDA and FDA kind of allowing these things to get through and giving allowance to the big producers. I love the whole messaging of Kelly and Casey Means that the tobacco industry, when it got its haircut, turned and moved a lot of their investments, that we're talking about R.J. Reynolds, into big food. And that the case is made by the Means, and I think it's pretty persuasive, that the same business model applies, that we are being hooked on food by processing food so that it has these characteristics that are really addictive for us in terms of our palate and our brain response, like you were talking about the emulsifiers, fats, sugars. These things just go into our little monkey brain and say, this is the stuff you want. And they have made a business that is entirely parallel to the business model of tobacco, of getting you hooked on the product. But they've transformed the whole large food industry into using that same business model.
You know the story of sucralose? You guys know what that is?
Yeah.
Artificial sweetener?
Yeah.
I think most people would be surprised to find out that the artificial sweetener packet they like to put in their coffee was discovered when I believe it was a researcher, was trying to make a pesticide by combining chlorine with sugar to kill insects, and misunderstood his professor, who said, test it. And he thought he said, taste it. So he did and said, tastes good. And they were like, really? The intention was pesticide. I think it was bonding chlorine with sugar. And now we have a widely available alternative sweetener, they call it, which is, it's always strange to me that clearly there's questions about whether that will be safe for human consumption, and they say, "I don't worry, it is." And I'm like, maybe you just don't.
The assumption of safety.
This
right?
is
Like
analogous to the origin of glyphosate we were talking about a minute ago, where it was was a pipe
industrial pipe cleaner. It draws the rust and stuff out.
And it's antibiotic, right? I think
it is an antibiotic. It kills everything inside.
And they found that the areas around where they're using it for cleaning the pipes had no weeds, and they said, "Oh, we got a new indication."
I want to get to I want to talk, just because there's a very interesting conversation. I think your audience is capable of understanding it, and it's something that was new to me. And Whitney Webb actually went after a guy named Jim O'Neill, who I met. I'm not going to vouch for the guy, but I did have a very interesting conversation, and she was really upset with this perspective he has, which is getting rid of efficacy inside of the FDA. I think it's a very, very interesting conversation, though. And when he explained it to me, and I'd be curious where you're at, Dr. Malone. But what he said is, do you know that the FDA's original mandate was just for safety and purity? It was only designed to say what's in this bottle is what's written on this label, and is it safe? That's all it was there to do. Years into it, the pharmaceutical industry said, we think that you should be involved in efficacy. You have to determine what the thing does. Can it do what it says it does? And so they did. They got involved, and that was the beginning of sort of the $100 million randomized control trials. Now you have the big expense to get a product out there to be able to say, oh, it cures cancer, it does this. Only the pharmaceutical industry can afford it. That's where vitamins can't make any claim. Nobody else can make a claim. And that's where the FDA took over the industry. And if you think about it, if it's involved in efficacy, it immediately becomes a marketing arm for the product developer. If it says this works, or this vaccine works, or this cancer drug works, now the FDA is actually advertising it to the public. If this is the types of things that we should be looking at, what if we went back to the mandate? All FDA is responsible for is it safe? Prove your product is safe for human consumption or however it's being used, and that what's in the bottle is what it says it is, and let the market decide whether this thing works or not, whether it does what it says it does. I'm going to go to the doctor that's having better results in cancer, and he may be using ivermectin and, fenbendazole or whatever it is. Does the FDA need to be involved in that process? We get, as consumers, to decide whether we think something's efficacious. If we went back there, now a vitamin can make the same claims that a drug is making, and you decide whether it's working for you or not. The society starts to decide, or the doctors you're going to decide. It would totally change the way our system works right now, and I think it's a very interesting conversation.
I want, real quick, just a citation, because I see a lot of people are contesting what I just said about sucralose, and I am correct. You are wrong. Some people are saying it's saccharin. Tim's story is BS. Here you go. I pulled it up. Sucralose, often marketed as Splenda, is an artificial sweetener that tastes similar to sugar but with 0 calories. Its discovery is famously attributed to the researcher misinterpreting test as taste. The story goes that during research on sucrose derivatives, scientist Shashikant Phadnis misheard the command to test a chlorinated sugar compound as taste it, leading to the accidental discovery of its sweetness. That is sucralose, not saccharin, sucralose. Splenda, a.k.a.
So to Dell's thread about changing the structure, the underpinnings of the mission that FDA has, you're accurate in referring to kind of the history and the growth of FDA. But as happens with all these agencies, once you establish a federal mandate, it tends to get grown. Mm-hmm. And that's what's happened, is this kind of mission creep that occurs in agency after agency. And I think there's a lot of merit to the idea of pulling FDA back. I think there's another thing, too, that's important to understand. People don't process. How does FDA get its power? Because for those of us that are constitutionalists, the Constitution does not allocate the regulation of medicine or medical products or medical practice to the federal government. Therefore, it vests to the states. So how does the FDA justify its position? It's all grounded on interstate commerce. Because the Constitution vests the right to regulate interstate commerce to the federal government, that is the crack that has allowed the FDA to slip in. And also USDA, which is why you have these situations like the Amish farmers, notably in Pennsylvania, that are producing raw milk or beef or whatever, and they can't transport it across state lines. That's because of the Interstate Commerce Clause, and that's what allows the feds to come in. I think we've got to really look at this kind of transformation that has occurred in a gradualistic way across all of these agencies. The CDC should not be telling physicians, let alone states, what they should practice, how they should practice, what they should do. They don't have the right to do that. CDC is not even chartered. CDC is it's one of these agencies that was never authorized by Congress, and it could be eliminated basically with a stroke of the pen by Donald Trump if he wanted to, just like USAID.
Where's the red line in these artificial dyes are really bad for everybody, and parents don't realize that Red 40, they don't realize, what is that? It comes from a little bug they mash up. It's got like an aluminum compound in it or something. Or tartrazine, which Robert was talking about quite a bit, a coal tar derivative that turns things yellow. we want the government to ban these things, right? Or you know,
Well, I think there's two ways to go, right? Do we treat it like cigarettes? You have this whole the grass that generally recognized as safe. So these new chemicals come out. Now, vitamins fall under that too, which I wasn't really paying attention to recently. Like generally recognized as safe, these compounds that are in a vitamin C or whatever, we don't have to have every single vitamin C company prove that it's safe. So that you see a basis for generally recognized as safe. But a brand new chemical like a dye comes on the market, and the FDA is just looking the other way and saying, we're going to give you a grass, that's generally recognized as safe, so it's going into food, and now you have to have enough people poisoned by it. Someone's got to figure out funding, because now you're in a post-marketing space. Who's doing that post-marketing research? Who can fund it? And then you got to try and win a lawsuit against a Kellogg's or a giant company, and so that isn't working, right? I think, so either we've got to put more energy into, you have to prove this thing is safe before we put it into our food, which means that's what we thought the FDA was doing. Or if you're not going to do that, then there should be a warning label. This product was never tested for human consumption, and there are studies that show that it's an endocrine disruptor and can cause cancer. Eat at your own risk.
I mean, I suppose there's the libertarian view of choose what you eat, right? I try to eat healthier. We have farm fresh eggs from the chickens, but most people can't afford to live that way. They go to the grocery store and they grab a box of processed grains, and they've got a whole bunch of crazy preservatives in it. That sickens society. And then my concern is a developmentally stunted, diseased population will vote for its own destruction because it's not. It's a gangrenous function of the body politic, essentially.
But it will vote because it's stuck on a television that is owned by the people making the poison that they're eating every day.
Well, just even outside of that, if you took 100 people and had them build a society, and then one day introduced a food substance that they were all consuming with a rate of 7% genetic degradation per generation, eventually they are dysfunctional, decrepit, unable to reproduce,
Sick.
Yeah,
sick. There's this. I don't know if you've ever. You guys have probably heard the studies they've done on cats and the meat consumption, raw versus cooked and dairy. They had 3 generations of cats, and there's numerous studies that have followed this. They one family of cats were given only raw meats, one was given only cooked meats, and one was given only dairy products. The cooked meat family, within a few generations, started losing their hair, becoming sickly, eventually lost the ability to reproduce. The raw meats flourished and had way too many babies, and the dairy was somewhere in the middle. So you look at something as simple as obligate carnivores like cats. Then apply that to the human population, where we have poisons in our food that don't immediately kill you, but slowly over time do. Cats losing their hair, coughing, gagging, and not reproducing is obvious, but what happens when the brain is damaged, even a small percentage over a long period of time? These individuals who continually eat these products thinking it's safe are going to get more and more damaged, meaning their ability to self-regulate will be harmed. And then those of us who are actually like, hey guys, let's exercise, eat right, eat healthy, and make America healthy again, are going to be combating people who are otherwise diseased from environmental toxins, voting against the interests of those that are trying to save them.
I think that you're pointing out one of the biggest issues we have. Not only are we sick, but we are reaching the point where no one remembers a time when we weren't sick, right? We're about to lose the last generation. I didn't mean to point at you. You may still be too young to have had measles, to have been through the Brady Bunch time, right? Where it was a joke, at a laugh track to it. Now we live in it's the end of the world, right? But that same generation is the last generation that never had an asthma inhaler, had no peanut allergies, did not understand what autoimmune disease was until much later in their lives. Every kid now that's a part of the voting body looks at what Robert Kennedy Jr. is saying and saying, there were no autistic people my age. Like, that doesn't make sense to them. They're like, well, of course there were. And the pharmaceutical industry has played on that. The biggest argument they've had is autism's always been here. We're just diagnosing it better. I mean, that is literally the final spot that they've landed on, which is the most insane statement, is Robert Kennedy Jr. is saying, then find me anyone my age with autism. But at 1 in 34, certainly at 1 in 18 to 20 boys, which is where we're at now, there should be old folks' homes filled with men standing in corners with repetitive motion disorders, everything. It doesn't exist. Yet the pharmaceutical industry is preying on a generation that sees autism all around them, sees it at 1 in 20, preys on a 60% autoimmune and neurological disease crisis. 1 in 4 kids is leaving elementary school on a drug they're going to be on their rest of their lives, and that's normal. Girls in college, I'm hearing, somewhere around 50% are on antidepressants. Almost every boy is taking Ritalin in order to focus. That is normal, and they are the ones going to be deciding, who they're going to vote for to protect their health. What do they know about health? I mean, we are so far away from where we were healthy. So to your point, not only are we sick, it's also normalized because it's all that we see, and the rest is starting to sound like a dream or a mythology.
And where we end up is, let's say 50 years from now, when entire urban populations, less so in the rural areas, have been on some kind of mind-altering drug. And I don't mean that, I don't mean like a recreational drug. I mean like either for focus or for depression from the time they were children.
Yeah.
And then when the Make America Healthy Again movement 2.0 emerges, these people are going to be like, they're trying to kill us by taking away our life-saving medication.
Right. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. What I always say is we have a generation now that hasn't had a sober day in their lives. They haven't been sober. They have been on drugs since now we're giving infants antidepressants. I mean, it is so systemic and such a problem. You're right. And the pharmaceutical industry pushes the ads. They have Democrats saying, you're taking away, you're making psychology a bad thing, and you're against these people. And the fact that we want to look at school shootings, can we at least put SSRIs on the table as a part of the conversation? It's not allowed. Now you're attacking people that have psychological issues, and it's the whole thing is.
It's all wrapped up in wokeism. It's all wrapped up in
wokeism.
The thing that I find stunning about all this is I live in rural Virginia, and a lot of these things that we're talking about is not an issue in my community. I live around farmers and people that live close to the land, or we could make the case they are physicals. And a lot of what we're talking about are problems of the urban society and of people that are living in the virtual world. This kind of division that we're touching on here is pretty alien for a lot of, the pejorative is the flyover states. For folks that are out there doing stuff on a daily basis, whether it's HVAC or farming or whatever, they're not living in this world that we're describing in a general sense.
So I want to interrupt you.
Yeah, go.
Someone brought up an interesting point on testosterone. And you mentioned the flyover states, and I got to thinking, a lot of people in these rural areas, physical labor is just a part of your daily life.
What you do.
Chopping wood is fun, actually, but that's going to stimulate muscle development and testosterone production, and testosterone production is going to have an effect on your mind. And so I wonder how much.
And don't forget the role of sunlight. We were talking about light earlier on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I look at these cities, and what do we find? People are largely indoors, no sunlight. Limited physical activity relative to how humans used to live a long time ago through the Industrial Revolution and through office jobs and things like this. Obviously, there are people who still do construction and do physical labor, but this means you are going to have. I wonder if this has been studied. Have they tracked the average testosterone levels by region of the United States?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that they have been tracking testosterone levels, and it's been plummeting. So is sperm count and a lot of the other.
I would recommend everyone see the documentary Wall-E.
Well, it's a good point, Tim, because I would say that cities have become toxic on every level because there's just a higher density of all these systemic inputs that are so alien to our body.
But a lot of what we're talking about here has to do, if we boil it down, with media and information and the biasing of information. That's when we're talking about, we're kind of talking about culture and information and media. And the folks that are living in the bi-coastal urban areas are living in a reality in which their entire awareness is being manipulated on a daily basis. Of course, anybody that's interacting with social media, whereas if is the same case or even more so. But if you're out there actually doing things on a daily basis and interacting with others, other human beings, then you're living in a very separate reality. And I think this is one of the things that's really kind of creating a huge rift in the American body politic. You know, when you look at the distribution of blue and red counties that voted for Trump or didn't vote for Trump, it's right there in your face.
So I did a quick search. There doesn't seem to be any strong distinction between anywhere in the country and the testosterone levels, save for one state. It has very, very high testosterone levels. Which state would you think that is?
I'm guessing Texas.
Texas.
Oh, no, but there's two states, and Texas would have been one of them. The other one, any other ideas?
No.
Florida.
Florida, really?
Yeah.
Sunshine.
And they're out physically a lot more, people in Florida.
And I'm just thinking about the politics of the place. Miami turning red. I'm like, oh yeah. The average testosterone level in Florida is between 500 and 599 NGDL. What does that stand for?
Nanograms per deciliter.
There you go. Arkansas has appears to be one of the that's incorrect. Why would they put it that way? So most states, it's actually between 400 and 500, and it fluctuates. There's no real distinction between them, except for Florida, which has very high. So it's between 400 and 500. They're 500 and 600.
Another one of the drivers in the
Florida.
Another one of the drivers in the testosterone crisis, really, I think we can say, is age. And as people age, their testosterone levels tend to plummet.
Yeah, but I would have thought that would have affected Florida. That's what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
surprised.
Florida,
The Florida, like these,
Well,
these
but
you
the
know.
the counter narrative that's happening now is the rise of hormonal supplementation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's because if there's this whole discussion going on, can you reverse aging? What I'm seeing, and I think what in general is happening right now is the rise of bioidentical hormone supplementation, because as those levels drop, you have to artificially support them if you want to maintain kind of the quality of life that you had before, sex drive and everything else. And when you do that, you see people that seem to be growing younger. It's a paradox. And if they drop their weight and they get on bioidentical hormone supplementation, which, by the way, the government doesn't subsidize. They will pay for you to have synthetic hormones, but they won't pay for you to have bioidentical hormones. You have to pay for it out of your own pocket. So that's one of the reasons why you see the rich people showing these signs that they're not aging. You see these
like
80-year-olds or Larry Ellison, right? The other day, he's 80 years old and he looks like he's a spring chicken. It looks like he's in his 50s.
So this is is this like testosterone replacement therapy
Testosterone and also female hormones
for women?
for women, absolutely, and it improves bone density. You want to talk about health so the dynamic is the population is aging. And as the population's aging, it's known that aging is associated with decline in a variety of endocrine functions, and that includes our sex hormones. And so if you get in there and artificially supplement those, then you see people that they have a new lease on life. It's like they're young again.
I got a question for you. Maybe you can't answer. They do stem cell therapy now.
Yes, absolutely. This is a key topic with MAHA and some of the strategies. Basically offshoring stem cell therapy for regenerative medicine right now is where you have to go, and only the rich people can access it.
So the Cellular Performance Institute, I visited them in Tijuana. They're outside the country.
Right.
They, I believe they're one of the sponsors for UFC. Many of these UFC fighters will have cartilage damage. They will inject stem cells to the damaged site. The stem cells will then effectively copy the cartilage material and regrow it. And so I met tons of fighters who said they had, rotator cuff injuries.
And
injuries.
this is totally contrary to the established narrative in medicine. You're not supposed to be able to do this. And what these people are is biohackers. Okay, we put out an essay the other day where we talked about methylene blue. I mean, think about it. We now have, as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, a bodybuilder biohacker.
Yeah.
Okay, what's happening in these sectors, like you're talking about the WFC and the bodybuilders and weightlifters, they are biohacking themselves. They're experimenting with nutraceuticals, vitamins, all these other supplements in a really aggressive way. And what they're doing is they're experimenting on themselves, and they are breaking the ice for all of us. We owe them a huge debt.
Well,
You made an important word though, because experimenting. I think a lot of people like. I don't jump on like this is where an FDA is necessary. Like stem cells super cool, but I don't just want to go to anybody that's injecting into eyeballs. Oh, it does all this stuff. Yeah, but we don't know what the long-term effects are going to be for these UFC fighters. It may be great, but there aren't long-term trials there. Things like that. So I'm all for. You should know you're experimenting. You should know the product should say this. We have no long-term idea of like, does it keep growing? Does it turn into tumors? We have no idea where this is all going. It's so brand new. So yes, experiment. Yes, we should do it.
Use it your own risk.
Yes,
use it your own risk.
But I think we get into a dangerous place when it's just like, oh, it should just be available to everybody. Look how great it is. Mercury was great as a product. I mean, it got rid of cold so quickly and cold sores.
But Del,
okay,
go ahead.
The question I wanted to ask when I brought it up was, when they do stem cell IV infusion, they say that damaged, inflamed cells release chemical signals. They attract stem cells. The stem cells then bond to the area and replicate the nearby cells, effectively repairing the damage. What would happen if someone got stem cell treatment every 3 months? Could they live forever, or what would happen if they're constantly injecting themselves with stem cells to repair damaged cells?
The answer is we don't know.
Right.
But the regenerative medicine is opening up whole new frontiers in terms of human longevity and the effects of age. That is undeniable. And unfortunately, because of a variety of policies, it is only really available to the wealthy or those that are willing to commit a large fraction of their income to maintaining their own personal health. But this, personally, you made the case that the FDA should be drawn back, or certainly you recited the case that the FDA should be drawn back to the position where it ensures purity and identity. Those are the technical terms.
Safety and purity, yeah.
Safety, purity, and identity, okay? And doesn't take a position on efficacy. It basically allows the consumer to make their own judgment. This is a fundamentally a libertarian position, and it puts you in control, Tim, of your own health. You are the one, and it requires a person who is willing to take personal responsibility. And in our culture right now, this is one of the fundamental problems. We don't take personal responsibility for our own decisions in every which way, including our health decisions. And so that's when we end up with this position. Well, the state has the responsibility to ensure that everything is going to be hunky-dory for me if I do this, that, or the other thing. And because I don't want to be personally responsible for it. That this gets into the logic of the pediatric schedule, everything.
I think it was the story of the time machine. He goes into the future, and in the future, humanity is split into two different races. There's like primitive, stupid creatures, and then super intelligent humans. Or maybe I'm getting the story wrong. But thinking about all this stuff and talking about the stem cell therapy and other popular trends in health, it really does feel like we are moving in a direction where humanity will exist as two different cultural sets.
Well, this is the transhumanism argument,
right?
Okay, is that there is a school of thought, a lot of it concentrated in the Silicon Valley bros, the tech bros, that the human species is obsolete. We've mismanaged the environment, and we have to turn over management of the globe and the future to intelligent machines. I mean, how many science fiction movies do we have to see about this, right? Terminator being the notable one, and The Matrix being another. But the theory is that humans are obsolete, that humans that refuse to accept things like Neuralink, that will allow them to directly connect, as opposed to the indirect connections that we have with these, with this, monster database, artificial intelligence entity that's out there, that is moving towards general autonomous artificial intelligence. That's the Larry Ellison thing that he pitched to the president on second day of his presidency. So if you don't buy into that, then you'll be left behind and you'll functionally become akin to a pet. And this is where a lot of the logic of the useless eaters, you've heard that, right? Klaus Schwab and all that, that's coming from that same space, that there is this theory that we are going to move to a position where eventually it's only going to be the machines that are going to be the evolved species, and human beings are basically going to be akin to dogs.
But and you recognize that, but there's nothing you can do about it. When these people hook themselves into the machine, their mental capacity will, assuming we get read-write technologies in Neuralink, which I assume is absolutely possible. I don't see why not. And they can supplement their brain power with massive AI, maybe becoming some kind of creepy hive mind. Who knows? Let's just say a single individual, Silicon Tech Valley bro, pumps himself full of stem cells, chemicals, or otherwise, plugs his brain into a computer. We can sit here and speculate and say, we recognize what's going on. They will be so far beyond that, they'll say, you know, the world's smartest man is no bigger threat to me than its smartest termite, effectively.
Yeah, but I think, first of all, you're only talking about two different positions, one, like both around AI, cyborg. Maha is going to be focused on building an ecosystem. That's what I'm working on now. Is I'm CEO of Maha Action, and we're also looking at building tools to build an ecosystem for the people that don't want to go down the pharma road. That actually, there's so many practitioners, so many functional medicine doctors that are working with different types of energy, lasers, blue lights, red lights, all of these things. Also, you know, biohackers that are, or before you get into the sick care system that we're in, what if we developed a world where you can find people that actually make you, you know, healthier and stay healthier longer before you ever end up in a surgery or medical system? There will be a future where there will be those that went down that road. You're never going to end this pharmaceutical path. You're not going to end those that are going to jump into AI or those that are going to be cyborgs, if you will. And who knows who's the strongest that survives. I just think you have to decide, you know, that you have to recognize that there's a difference now, that there's different paths that you can be taking and deciding what health means to you. I remember once I was watching, because you talk about like getting a time capsule and saying, well, the advanced society was so much more advanced than this other group of, you know, that were like, you know, Neanderthals. But I think we've got to question also, what does it mean to modernize and what is the advanced society? I was once watching a documentary back when I was like 20 years old about some pygmy tribe in South America, and they had never seen anybody until this documentary crew was there, and they talked about how primitive they were. But what you know, when they described the lifestyle, like the men would go out and like shoot a monkey out of the tree, they'd grill it up, and the like spend a whole week. The tribe would eat off of the one monkey. They were fine. The women all sat around, you know, in the river, like, you know, doing laundry and hanging out, and the guys smoked something nearby and swung in hammocks for like 6 days, and they hunted 1 day a week. And I just thought, we called that primitive. I have a cell phone, I have all this technology, and I'm working, you know, 18 hours a day, and I'm the advanced society. It seems like the smart society would have been figuring out how to work less, and they've got that figured out.
Except they stub their toe, get an infection, and die.
Well, there could be that. I think I think that. Well, that's a good point. But what world do you want to live in, and what does being advanced actually mean? I think is a big question.
Yeah. Thank you, Del. And that's perfect lead into what I was hoping we could get into, is as humans, where are we going with this? What is it that we want? The thing that makes us human and that is being so badly damaged by this and that world, that tech world, is that one of the fundamentals of being human is your connectedness to other humans.
Yeah.
And an organic connectedness. I look you in the eye, we shake hands, we're talking, we live with each other, we communicate within our communities. That is what really gives value to life.
I think there are two worldviews, and one is I exist to serve God, and the other is I want to be God.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I agree.
I like that distinction.
With the transhumanists, and I think of the culture war, they want everything, and they care for nothing but themselves, largely.
It's narcissistic.
But then you have the inverse, which is the I exist for the greater, be it, you know, those that find themselves aligned with Trump or Maha, who are secular or agnostic or atheist, still believe in the bigger picture. that we exist for a better society, a better community, a country, or universe, whatever it may be. And then the religious and the devout say, I exist for the will of God or for God's divine mandate, whatever it may be. The tech bros are basically like, there is no God.
That's
I should
exactly
be
right.
it.
That's Yuval Harari.
Yep.
And not only is there no God, we have become the gods. That is explicitly the position of the World Economic Forum.
They're wrong.
I think it also comes down to fear of death.
Yeah.
Right? I think if you have a connection with God, you don't have a fear of death. And you live for the moment and the day that you're in. You realize that how long I'm on this planet, it's how I live anyway. And people are like, how do you do what you do? Aren't you afraid? Things like that. No, not at all. Because I live for the day I'm in. I want my kids, no matter when I die or how I die, I'm trying to represent to my kids, be passionate, do what you love, interact with human beings. How long you're here is not defining the quality of your life. You want to live every day. I want to go to bed every day and say, you know what, if I die tonight, it was a great day. I truly interacted. I had great relationships with people. I did what I was passionate about. I was good. People were good to me. It was an incredible moment, and I don't care how long we're here. And frankly, I go to a lot of these biohacking seminars because I'm in groups and I speak at them, but I don't want to live to be 100 years old. I want to have the best life I can. I want to be as healthy for as long as I can, but living forever to me is someone that's just afraid of dying and not accepting that this is just a temporary journey here.
It's a return to what is real, right? And how do you get that? And it's real connection to people, to the environment. Right. And I'm sure you guys have seen like the blue zones and this documentary, and it's always analyzing how these centenarians live. And it's because they just live a real life. They're outdoors. They're connected to their community. They're walking.
They don't overeat.
Eat real food. Yeah, they don't overeat, and they eat real food, but it's all the holistic picture of what is real. And that also comes with the purpose. Yeah. And when you have a purpose and you have that mortality, that makes it even more special. And that's what's really, I think, Maha should be focused on. And that costs little to no money. Right. And that's the whole key here is it should be decentralized because that is accessible for every single person.
It's one of the things we're thinking about right now with Maha Action is, and this is an idea from Dr. Oz who I'm talking to and Bobby, like, can we have an Alcoholics Anonymous but for health? But we're just about community, where we're going to try and set up on our website where we'll just give you like 3 interesting, a study or an article or a video, and anywhere you are in the country, start setting up groups to meet with each other, get together to have an experience together, to talk about where your health is at. Meet someone that says, hey, you know, I have been overeating. I'm eating late at night. Can I give you a call? And maybe you can talk me off the ledge once in a while. I'll try to do less like midnight cheesecake.
This is, we talk about what is causing all of these problems. And people like to mention the chemicals in our food as one, pharmaceuticals perhaps. There's a couple that I think are...
Those are all outside. They're doing it to me, not I have responsibility.
But a couple that I think need to be addressed are the social elements. One, technology has stopped us from walking around. Mm-hmm. So we do a lot of meetings remote. We're on the internet all day. We don't walk to the grocery store. You order from Amazon. But the other thing is the internet has separated community. So you make a really great point. You are the summation of the 5 people who surround you. That's what they say. But if you're surrounded by no one, you're just sitting in your house, you're eating, you're not exercising, you're getting sick, you have no influences. If you go out and meet people, like you were saying, and make those connections, you will be heavily influenced by what you are able to do with those people. For instance, if you want to get out of your house and hang out with people, and every time you do, they insist on going for a walk at the park, you will find yourself walking and losing weight inadvertently without effort.
Right.
And you're outside.
Exactly. Sunlight, better health.
Yeah.
Then you're going to be like, normally I eat a double cheeseburger, a large fry, and a large Coke. And the other 4 people say, well, there's this really great, chicken place. They've got lean meats and vegetables. We'd rather go there. And then you're like, okay, I guess. You look at the menu and you're like, no cheeseburgers? I guess I'll get the chicken breast with broccoli. Now you're eating healthier because of the people you've surrounded yourself with.
And that's where you could totally argue that technology is really like the most pervasive environmental toxin today because it hits us
well put.
Directly.
Well put.
I mean, directly, indirectly from the light, from the EMS, but then just keeping us inside and with no social connection. And then COVID just accelerated that to the highest degree. And it's really
so this is why now maybe it's a good time to introduce this. Remember back in the day, I got all attacked for talking about mass formation and the theories of Matthias Desmet.
Yeah.
So this idea that people can be readily hypnotized and become super suggestible has a lot to do if you I spent a lot of time with Matthias.
One of my favorite. If you haven't interviewed that guy, one of my favorite dudes on the planet.
If you kind of unpack this, it all comes down to the fact that we've been socially fragmented, and when we become socially fragmented, we become really susceptible to outside manipulation. And by the way, we were talking about the fear of death. That has become one of the major thrust vectors for pharma, is they are exploiting the fear of death. That's what a lot of their marketing is about the fear of death. If you think back, so let's just take, fast forwarding, let's take bird flu. There is no evidence that bird flu, even according to the CDC, represents a major human health threat at this point. And yet we are inundated with literally propaganda about how threatening that is. And the subtext of it is that if you don't do something, if the government doesn't do something soon, we are at risk for swine flu. The great 1918 event that changed the world, right? The prior pandemic. And it turns out that really all that death was not about influenza. It was about a subsequent bacterial pneumonia that we would cure routinely right now with a Z-Pack. Okay, and it was also about overdosing with aspirin, but this is weaponized.
They personalize an anomalous event, like a measles death in Texas.
Yeah. Measles is a great example.
The first death in 20 years from a Brady Bunch episode illness that had a death rate of 1 in 10,000 before a vaccine ever came along, and that's amongst the infected. The death rate in America was 1 out of every 500,000 people died in America, but they make you think that one death could be you. They don't look into, was that child sick? Were they malnourished? Did they have other issues? And that's what I'm
why is this happening?
Right now.
To address the bird flu thing,
yeah.
I don't believe that generally it's mustache-twirling villains who are like, let's psychologically attack Americans with this story, because we're seeing it from all different media outlets. What it is, largely, and there are certainly...
Well, you're assuming that there's diversity amongst those media outlets.
There certainly are, because the UK outlets are not operating in the same space politically and regionally as the American...
No, but they are all wrapped under the Trusted News Initiative that's run by the BBC.
So a UK outlet with different politics to an American conservative outlet that are at odds with each other and on the different spectrum reporting the same things are not part of the same initiative.
We did that with COVID. I mean, the entire world pushed the same false narrative around
You haven't
COVID.
been following USAID.
So the issue largely for these media companies is, while we do know that there are powerful special interests that are deeply intertwined that want certain narratives to emerge, there are major pharmaceuticals that are running principal advertising and the bulk advertising for a lot of these companies. The smaller outlets that are doing this, and the reason it's much more pervasive than just principal corporate news outlets, is that they're all going out of business. They're laying off their staffs left and right.
True. 538
is now shutting down. ABC's laying off staff. CNN's laying off staff, and they will latch on to anything that terrifies the public to make money.
It's the
Not
old.
true.
It's old.
Not true.
Well, it's the old journalistic.
They could latch on to autism and vaccines, and they would make a fortune.
They'd lose their advertisers. They'd lose their advertisers.
So that's the point.
They don't talk about fentanyl.
So this is exactly my point.
Okay. All right.
They need views to sell ads.
Yes.
They cannot offend their advertisers, be it Burger King or Pfizer. Right. How can they get views? They're going to scream bird flu in your face as loud as possible.
Right, because it's acceptable to the advertiser. So they're in a very narrowing hallway, and it's why they're dying.
But that ecosystem that you're talking about, the kind of if it bleeds, it leads ecosystem, which is what we're talking about, that gets clicks, likes, and follows and advertising revenue, propagates all the way down to the smallest podcaster, frankly.
It does. So we are seeing a big change with podcasts in general, because sponsorships have decentralized completely, and there are shows that built themselves off of particular audiences. So I'll give you a great example of the limitations we face. Are you familiar with the Hallow app? It's a Christian prayer meditation app.
Okay, no.
I think it's awesome. I think it's a really cool thing. Mark Wahlberg advertises it. It was Ash Wednesday this week. Chris Pratt did a commercial. It was very great. I am not a Christian. I do believe in God, but I'm not a Christian. They sponsored Timcast IRL, and I said, it's not appropriate for me to read an ad for a Christian prayer app as not a Christian. However, Mary Morgan, a recurring guest, one of our hosts here at Timcast, is a devout Catholic and does have the app, and said, I will read that. Advertisers come to us, and in a more decentralized way, I'm not going to run an ad, because in the podcasting space, I, as the host and the personality that represents certain moral values, have things I can or cannot offer up. How could I do a show where I routinely talk about my spiritual views, not Christian, but, not necessarily deist, and then all of a sudden be like, I'm going to promote this ad saying it's the best ad, you can find Jesus, whatever. People would be like, you're full of it.
Right. That's
So-
the problem is
You're rare too, right,
you'll
yeah.
destroy your legitimacy.
So now with the media space being decentralized largely, and instead of there being 3 channels, there's 300 top podcasts, you're not going to see Joe Rogan, in all likelihood, run an ad for Pfizer and Fanaps Paradone or whatever it's called, because he's going to be like, I routinely talk against big pharmaceutical manipulation of media. How could I read this ad for any amount of money? Whereas cable TV news has not attached any individual's worldview to the ads they do. So it doesn't matter if a host says, I'm deeply concerned about big pharma, and then a commercial runs for big pharma. Likely, the editorial department will say, ease up on big pharma. They're sponsoring the show. Or famously, one of my favorite jokes from The Simpsons is when Krusty the Clown says something off color, and then Bart says he's just going to blame it on his Percodan addiction. And then Krusty says, it's not my fault. It's my Percodan addiction. Anyway, now a word from our new sponsor, Percodan. Oh, crap.
Yeah.
That's how it used to be. Now it is decentralizing, and I think one of the reasons we're seeing Maha become, it's ascended. It's in the Trump administration.
Yeah.
I love it. It is, RFK Jr. is the head of HHS. It's because of a decentralized media that is allowing people to see different perspectives, and it's breaking the advertising cartel that ran big networks. They're losing all of their audience.
It's broken. We broke it.
Absolutely.
This last election proved that you and Joe Rogan and those of us that have been podcasting or doing new media, we broke it. We won. Bigger than Donald Trump getting into office is the fact that the mainstream legacy media ran a 24-hour-a-day news cycle, and the 2 biggest baddies in that news cycle were Donald Trump and Robert Kennedy Jr. I happen to be director of communications for Robert Kennedy Jr. the entire time. The guy was polling 20% almost out of the gate as an independent candidate, the most successful independent candidate there was. If, as your point, media was like, if it bleeds, it reads, you had a guy that was going to change this election in one way or another. With 20% of the vote, he had power to affect this vote. And in our entire run, for 2 straight years, he only appeared in interviews on legacy media twice. He got 2 interviews that whole time. They literally thought we could starve him out. We can only talk about him in negative terms, and he will never get anywhere.
This was the podcast election.
It was the podcast election. I will say, when I was standing in the Oval Office when Bobby put his hand on that Bible, and I was thinking, you know what? This is even sweeter than if he was being sworn in as president of the United States right now. For those of us that have known him, that have been in this medical freedom fight, because had he been president, which would have been amazing, you could have said, well, maybe it's his Ukraine view or all the other brilliant things that he talks about. He's so well read. But I was sitting there on the plane home thinking, his most controversial issue is his positions on health. It is the most controversial space he's in. It's where he's been tarred and feathered for over a decade now. And we just put him not just in a health position, he just took the most powerful position in health in the world, which is the most controversial space he lives in, with a 24-hour-a-day news cycle funded by the pharmaceutical industry trying to stop him, the globalists trying to stop him. Bro, we have taken the power. Now we've got to say what we got to watch out for is it going to stay decentralized? All the powers, all the money in the world is trying to figure out how to manipulate us, how to get a hold of YouTube, how to make sure that we can't move again.
I'm glad RFK Jr. lost. Because as president, he would not have been able to dedicate his sole focus to HHS the way he can now. And so obviously, I think he would have been a great president. But the position he's in now allows him not have to be bogged down by foreign policy reports in the morning. He can go after the health issue, which I think we interviewed him on IRL, and I said this afterwards. It was obvious. You talk to him about politics, he's going to tell you about politics. He's going to tell you what he knows. When you talk to him about health, he lights up.
Yeah.
Like a Christmas tree. He can tell you everything. He gets passionate. He gets high energy. And I said, that's what he deeply cares about. So this administration right now with Tulsi DNI, with Elon doing Doge, with RFK at HHS, it's a dream team.
It's a dream team of passionate people in their wheelhouse space. We have never seen anything like this. In fact, and I've said when we're coming into the end of the election to reporters, look at what's Robert Kennedy Jr. really going to do? I was like, I'll tell you what Donald Trump has done. Whether you love him or you hate him, either way, our country is now involved in politics. We are focused now. I would say if I went out on the street and stopped 1,000 people and said, this is right before the election, who's our current HHS secretary? How many people would be able to answer that? They wouldn't know. I said, now who's about to be HHS secretary? And they'd be like, oh, Robert Kennedy Jr. That's more than just celebrity. That's the fact that we're engaged. When have we ever watched a Trump with Elon Musk and Dr. Oz and Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard? We know these people like they're superheroes. We're more engaged now. And to Trump's point, he's treating it almost like a reality show. He's bringing in media people that are stars in the space that they're in. So while we're engaged, we've got to make sure that the people don't just sit back and think that those 5 people are going to change the world. They're not going to do shit without us. It's the pressure that comes from our involvement. This is a nation that only works if it's of, for, and by the people, not just by the 5 people that we've selected. It means we've got to stay engaged right now, which is a critical moment. I'm afraid we're going to go back to sleep.
I warn you. Do you think that the machine, the narrative machine, is simply going to be like, well, guess we lost? Or are they going to take a look at, they've got $25 million in Rachel Maddow for her contract per year. They're going to have a meeting and they're going to say, and I mean literally Comcast, MSNBC, big corporate heads, big Democrat donors. They're going to say, how many top global podcasts can we buy for $25 million in a year? And I'm going to be honest. You go to any of these prominent liberals, offer them $1 million, they will say yes. In fact, many of them would sign with those networks for free of charge in exchange for marketing and being part of the network. $25 million for Rachel Maddow is flushed down the toilet when she gets no ratings. Sure, she gets great ratings among 70-year-olds. But with this being the podcast presidency, expect to see this year and next, I'm talking hundreds of millions of dollars invested into liberal establishment. And let's just say, you're going to start seeing big podcasters brought to you by Pfizer.
I agree. I don't think it'll matter.
I think what this encapsulates is the importance really is not just of Maha and the administration, but the continuation of the momentum on the consumer level of people. And if that continues, then that stuff won't matter.
I think it will matter.
You're not popular because of the people that fund you or the ads that you do. You're popular because of your voice, because enough people said, I've watched him get it right enough times that I am repeating my visit there. This idea that social media somehow manipulates people and creates a bubble. We don't keep going back to a podcaster that we catch lying, getting it wrong. What they think, this is their problem. The pharmaceutical industry, yes, they are going to fund a podcaster to spew a bunch of bullcrap that doesn't stand up, that will support the next COVID virus that comes along or pandemic and the products behind it. But the population it won't matter that it was legacy media or podcast.
Totally disagree. The strategies they use for narrative manipulation are more sophisticated than that, and the only reason they failed is because they largely ignored the space and couldn't get a grasp on it. What they've been doing for some time, and I likely believe they will ramp up, this is the importance of Rumble, why Rumble must succeed. People think, oh, Trump's in, it's over, we win. No, it's not. TikTok is a really great example. Donald Trump is supporting TikTok. It's a tremendous mistake. We had the older millennial on last night. He's been banned, he said, 61 times on his 60-second account. TikTok, you operate it's outside of our jurisdiction as the United States. We can't take a look at their algorithm. We can't take a look at their data capture. We can't take a look at what narratives they're pushing, but we can generally see on the surface what they are. Dylan Mulvaney with 13 million followers on TikTok, never banned, no issues. What they do is they will operate a censorship pressure valve.
If we're not competing on an even playing field,
we will not be.
Right.
And we will not.
That I agree with.
So this is why Rumble must succeed. It's why we joined Rumble recently more heavily as part of a network, and it's why we've been posting on Rumble for a long time. And it's a challenge because a lot of people, nobody wants to be the first to sacrifice to plant the tree whose shade they know they won't sit beneath. What's going to happen is the big tech platforms are going to feign adherence to Donald Trump as they are. They're going to donate to him. They're going to set the censorship levels at 51% censored conservative, 49% censored Democrat. They are going to create a downward slope towards pro-pharma, pro-narrative machine, knowing that if they come out with the liberals' version of Joe Rogan, who simply says, we love big pharma, it's not going to work. But if they suppress Joe and cap his maximum reach and then prop up more moderate, I'll give you a good example, Gavin Newsom. Why is Gavin Newsom sitting down with Charlie Kirk?
Yeah.
It's because he's trying to recapture lost liberals and say, what are the issues we can sacrifice on? He talks to Charlie Kirk about transgender sports. He talks to him about books in schools, and he concedes largely those points, resulting in a massive leftist, far leftist backlash. He does not care. Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks, same deal. They want to recapture the middle. And so they're saying, let's sacrifice these portions that have failed us. Let's realign. And in 10 or 15 years, we will have recaptured the modern American audience. We as independent producers will not be able to compete with Comcast and Disney putting $1 billion behind podcasters. And while we can say as of now, people want authenticity, they will figure out how to make it work. And if you don't believe me, ask Coca-Cola why they keep buying commercials, even though they're the most popular beverage in the world or whatever it may be. Why are there Coke ads everywhere? Because mass media works. It sets narrative. The reason why I think we largely won is because they made mistakes in this space. They made mistakes early on that they could not rectify soon enough. If they had censored Joe Rogan in 2011 when he was on Ustream or whatever, we would not be in this point.
You're right. That I agree with you. I mean, I was just saying, as far as our voices, if they get control of the levers and they censor us, which was the bullet, I hope we at least dodged some of it. The moment Donald Trump dodged that bullet, this nation dodged a bullet, because the ads that I was running, I left the campaign at the very end just to move Kennedy voters over to Trump, which was a crazy experience. But we ran an ad, that we called "End Free Speech," and it was Kamala Harris promising censorship, and John Kerry demanding censorship. So we were on the verge of losing our First Amendment right, which is the only right that actually matters, because nothing exists after.
In order to preserve democracy.
In order to preserve democracy. It's insane. But you're right. We've got to be really careful. And I'm not sure, hopefully Donald Trump has enough people around him. I think a huge transition, by the way, is watching that we're not going to vaccinate the birds all of a sudden, to see the USDA make a shift, because there's a lot of concerns. So it looks like the Trump administration is growing an ability to evolve and learn, which I don't think it had during the last time.
I'll add one thing to this, which is breaking news as of yesterday. Act Blue is in chaos. This is the Democrats' fundraising platform. They lost, seven executives. The speculation right now is the gutting of USAID funds and the EPA $375 billion slush fund has pulled hundreds of billions of dollars out of the establishment bureaucratic state's machine. And so while we do fear mass investment into opposition media, or I shouldn't call it opposition. It's opposition at this point because we won. Maybe not. Maybe this is why Donald Trump is in for 1 month and he's going so heavy with Doge and going after these agencies, because it is, I call it Donald Trump's march to the sea on the deep state, scorched earth, destroying and raising the crops and the resources of the bureaucratic state so they cannot mount a defense
So what we're learning, and you're correctly pointing out, is that globally, a lot of the Western media has been subsidized as a agent of foreign policy and state policy. That's what USAID was doing. Mike Benz talks about it as soft power, and he basically makes the case that as an empire, that we have to use soft power, and it's to some extent appropriate that we do so. And one of our primary mechanisms, one of the most effective, cost-effective mechanisms, is not armed combat, but it's information warfare. And that we've used as an agent of a product of State Department and foreign policy now for decades. And it has been enormously effective. We have engaged in regime change. The color revolutions have all been sponsored through the mechanisms that are now being revealed with the USAID funding. We've created our own news agencies, our own reporter training programs. One of the things I love to cite, you ever heard of advocacy journalism? Advocacy journalism is the norm now. Okay, well, who funded the transition of all of the major academic centers for teaching journalism? to transition towards advocacy journalism? The answer is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The forces that are underneath this, Soros was partnered with USAID across the world. This is big money, and it has been central to this manipulation of narrative. And it has been justified as necessary in order to enable U.S. foreign policy objectives and maintenance of the U.S. imperial state. But that's where we're at. And as you point out, suddenly the rug is pulled out. And those systems, those NGOs that were dependent on government funding and so therefore were not truly non-governmental, and are collapsing.
I also want to point out that we were given an advantage we may never get again, which was the COVID pandemic. The biggest mistake the machine made, and I think about like were they planning the takeover of the world? And I've always said the vaccines is one of the great controls of humanity. If you can just be injecting everybody with products that they just line up, they never ask a question, there's all sorts of controls you can have there. But I'm not a conspiracy theorist, it's just the obvious truth. But here's the point. At some point, the globalists were going to have to finally take America and get us to agree to give up our rights. And how are they going to do that? I mean, if you look at it from Club of Rome and all this,
implement the China model. Implement the China model.
But at some point, they're going to have to go for the land grab. COVID was that moment. But here's the tragic mistake they made. Up until that point, most of us were too busy to pay attention. We got used to a news cycle that was just sound bites and bumper stickers because it's all we had time for. We're working 2 jobs. I can barely survive. I'm not taking a vacation anymore. I'm too busy to worry about what's in my food. I'm too busy to read the label. I'm too busy to ask my doctor a question. I'm just handing my kid over. I'm just in. Then all of a sudden, in their infinite wisdom, in their last power grab to grab control and take away our First Amendment rights and our constitutional rights, they said, let's lock them in their house so that they cannot move. And suddenly we sat there and said, I got nothing to do. Who's this Tim Pool guy? Oh, my God, a 2-hour pie. I don't normally watch anything for 2 hours, but I got nothing left to do. And they kicked back and we got to them. We finally had Robert Kennedy Jr. could speak for hours, and about all of the truth. And that's the biggest mistake they made. The machine that locked us down should never have done that if they wanted to take over the world.
The censorship machine was the worst it has ever been in that period.
Yeah.
The problem is you can only push so far before you break the machine. The pressure causes a political explosion. So for shows like ours, Tim Guest IRL, for instance, we were enjoying during the peak of COVID, 80, 90,000 concurrent viewers per episode, getting 1 million plus per night. People had nothing to do and nowhere to go. So they were watching nothing but us criticize, not so much anything that broke the rules, authoritarianism.
Right.
So for a lot of shows that spoke about lab leak theory, vaccination, or alternative medications, whatever it may be, banned instantly. For shows like ours, we were like, look, man, talk to a doctor. I'm not a doctor. Authoritarianism is wrong. You should have the right to make choices for yourself. One of the big points that I made during this, which I think was a good contribution, was I don't care if you guys get vaccinated. I really don't. If your doctor tells you you should get it, listen to your doctor. If you don't trust your doctor, it's called a second opinion. That's normal. It's in modern society. What was strange to me was celebrities advocating for driving their cars into parking lots of 7-Elevens and letting people they've never met inject them with anything. And so there was one moment where Casey Neistat, he's a good dude, I got no beef, tweeted, go get vaccinated. I responded to him saying, how about you go talk to your doctor about what's right for you?
Right.
And he responded with, that's strange. I didn't go to a doctor. I pulled up into a parking lot and got a vaccine from a site. And I said, you let a strange guy on the street inject you with something without going. And for that narrative right there, one, didn't break any rules. Yeah. I never told anybody not to get vaccinated. I'm saying, no. The rules were you cannot give medical advice to people watching the show. That's what the big concern was. I agree. I do not want that liability on me. So we had doctors out here. I got prescribed monoclonal antibodies, right? They told me, I was told not to get the vaccine because I was too young. They said, don't take it from someone who needs it. And I said, okay, that's it. Maybe your doctor will tell you something different. Maybe he'll tell you to get vaccinated. But would you really walk into a 7-Eleven parking lot and let a stranger you never met give you an injection? What if you have an allergy? What if there's something in your medical history the doctor doesn't know about? This was for a lot of people like, oh, that makes sense. And they couldn't ban us for it. We didn't break any rules. So for the people that were outright saying no, And for
Well, not
everybody
me.
else,
I was outright saying no, but I had a different model than you. I went completely on donations. I built my own website. I built my own player. I got off because I was canceled on YouTube. I was canceled on Facebook, but I saw it coming. And when I saw it coming, I said to all my audience that I built on those platforms, they're going to take me down. They're going to take me down. They're lying to you. The highwire.com, just know I'm there. And we ended up through COVID having 7 million views a week on our show. And I spend half that money suing the government of the United States. So I've won against the FDA, the NIH, CDC, Health and Human Services. When you heard that the Pfizer documents were 75 years, the FDA wanted to hide the Pfizer data, my nonprofit, my viewers paid to win that lawsuit. We won the Pfizer data, the Moderna data. So you want to talk about activist television? I'm an activist. I spend millions of dollars on the money I bring in suing the government of the United States and proving my truth.
We got time for just one more thing. I want to ask you about that. Now that RFK Jr. is the HHS secretary, what happens to the legal? During the Biden administration, you're suing, you're demanding information. Do you now simply text him on the phone, please, can I have this information?
No, because he still needs an avenue to get the information out. There's only so much he can report. We're still going to be bringing FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. We have a bigger legal army now going after the government than we ever have before. And Bobby, I don't know. We're going to see what happens. So far, we haven't gotten a redacted document. He hasn't been in there long enough. But I'm going to assume there is a bureaucracy in there. Someone might try to send us a redacted document. Then I'm going to go, hey, Bobby, we're getting some redacted documents. And by the way, guess who I'm suing if I have to sue to get what's written below these black lines? I'm going to be suing Robert Kennedy Jr., and I have no problem doing that. And I don't think he has a problem having me do that. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point. But this idea that suddenly the legal pressure is going to be off, it's the same thing I'm saying. Not only is our legal pressure going to double up, the public pressure has to stay on there. Robert Kennedy Jr. can only do what he wants to do and bring transparency if we keep demanding it. If we go back to sleep and just let the pharmaceutical industry infiltrate our podcasts and take over our television, he will be powerless. His power is in the people right now. And so we got to watch. Look at how much they're trying to turn the entire country against. When did we ever care that government was being fired? It's amazing to watch liberal media do Democrat, you actually care?
Had they ever heard of USAID before?
It's crazy.
Gentlemen, this has been a lot of fun. I really do appreciate all of you coming and having the conversation. We're going to wrap things up. Did you want to shout anything out before we go?
Yeah, just check out mahaaction.com, and then my other background is the highwire.com. That's where I do a lot of my information, my most cutting-edge stuff, and we're still funded by the people, and so far we're up and running.
Right on.
Malone.news, Cywar Enforcing the New World Order is the book, and at R.W. Malone, MD on X, Truth Social, Getter, and now Parler.
Right on.
DaylightComputer.com. That's our company. We're trying to build healthier technology. So I mentioned that was big environmental toxin. And at Bitcoin and _beef is my Twitter. That was a book I wrote 4 years ago.
Right on, gentlemen. It's been a blast. Thanks for hanging out. We're going to go, I think we're having sushi, which is healthy, and then pizza, which is halfway there. We'll be back tonight at 8 p.m. at rumble.com/TimCastIRL. It's going to be interesting because this Act Blue scandal is crazy. And the theory, of course, is that gutting USAID ripped funding for the Democrats out from under them. We'll see. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all tonight.